Hello. So this exercise is going to be focused on building the foundations for a mobile application. Now you're not going to have a mobile app by the time we're done with this exercise. There's a lot that goes into that. But what it is going to do is it's going to focus on building out a dynamic page layout that allows users to switch between tabs and that resizes to their device so that no matter what device you access it from, it looks nice and pretty. Uh, you should have a foundation of like custom states, responsive page layouts, and workflow rules in order to do this exercise. If you don't, I suggest brushing up on that. But if you don't, I mean, you can try and follow along, and some of this might just go a little straight over your head, but that's okay. We'll get through it. Okay, so what we see here is what our end result's going to be. So this is going to be a mobile page layout. It's, you can see the different tabs that we're going to have. You can see the ugly colors because we're going to use that so that we understand how things size and look. This is not by any means what a finished product should look like. Let's go ahead and start by creating a new page. So I'm going to come into the editor. I'm going to hit add new page. We're going to title it mobile and we're going to hit create. Now we're going to use the responsive editor that Bubble came out with recently. So you'll see, right now it's a blank screen. We're going to click over to the responsive tab. We're going to hit upgrade to responsive. It's still in beta, but honestly, I've been working with it here for a little over a month now, I think, and I like it a lot. So it's going to drastically improve our ability to build this easily. So let's go ahead and now we've got this page. What we're going to do is we're just going to set up this page first of all. So one thing to know about mobile apps is that they run or they are intended to run on a single page layout. So everything that you do will be housed on this single page. We're not going to be switching to different pages, right? Like a normal website, you may click the about page and it redirects you to a new about page. Everything we do here is going to be housed on the single page, and that's where the custom states come in. Is that's going to be how we hide information. Okay, so we've created our page. It's upgraded to the responsive editor. Let's go ahead and make some quick adjustments here. So we're going to go into the layout. I do not like fixed layouts. Obviously, that would defeat the purpose of it being responsive. So let's go ahead and just set this as a, let's use a column. I like columns. Now this won't matter too much, but because we're going to do everything we're going to do is in floating groups, but that's okay. So width for the UI builder, I just used 749. That's somewhat of an iPad, ratio or width. Obviously, every device is a little bit different, but that's what we're going to use. Let's go ahead and upgrade that page size to 800. That's just going to give us time, enough space to work with. But again, these things, they don't really matter too much, right? Because it's going to be responsive. Now we're going to go ahead and start with the floating groups. So everything that we do is going to be housed in floating groups. If you recall the first page here, we'll go back to our example that's already been set up. What we see on this page is we have three different sections, right? We have this section up top, we have this middle section that's big, and then we have this section at the bottom. So we're going to create those, and we're going to use floating groups to do that so that they size and float on the page accurately. So let's just go ahead and create three floating groups. We're going to go 1, 2, and 3, and you can see that, oh, maybe I did that 4 times. Let's go into the elements. Yeah, I did an extra one, so let's go ahead and delete that. So floating group A, this is just, I'm using oh my goodness, can't think of the word. I'm using an application editor that's already been set up. So the group has some presets, but yours might look differently when you drag it in. Let's go ahead and change these. So we don't want to use fixed. We're not going to use fixed, I don't think, for anything throughout this entire exercise. So we're going to upgrade and change these. So let's start with the first one. It's going to be our header. So it's a floating group A. Let's just rename that to floating header, so we remember what it is. And we're going to make that float top and to the left. So we want this to always be at the top, and left won't matter because we're going to extend it all the way across to the end. So now we're going to go into the elements here. We're going to make this actually, we can use fixed. I lied. So no, we can't. Oh my goodness, this is awkward. Anyways, let's go ahead and make that a row. Doesn't really matter what it is. We're going to center that row here, and we're going to make the fixed width. We're going to change this from pixels to percent. You see that extends all the way over. It's extending 400%. We obviously don't want that. We're going to make that 10% wide, and we're going to fix the height at, 10% wide. Jumping ahead, 100% wide and 10% tall. So let's go ahead and change that, and we're going to see that resize. And now what you see is now we've got this bar going all the way across. It's got this little swoop. We don't necessarily need that for here. So let's go ahead and, just edit the style for right now and get rid of the definition there. You don't have to do that step because yours won't look like that. So now we see we have this floating header goes all the way across. Now we're going to make the content group. So we're going to select our floating group B. Let's name that floating content. And we're going to float this one to both, right? So now this is going to take the top and the bottom, and it's going to shove this thing in the middle like a nice little sandwich. So instead of top, we're going to choose both. And what we'll see now is it is right here in the middle of the page. This is why the colors are going to help, because right now I can't tell which one's which. So let's go ahead and set this layout here. We're going to use column for this as well. And we're going to change the width from pixels to percents. You can see me use percents a lot through this because percents are going to grow and shrink with the amount of the page that's been loaded. So obviously 400% is a little excessive. Let's go ahead and do 100% of the page because we want this to extend all the way across. And we're going to use the height at percent, and we're going to change that to 80%. So now what we see here, I need to hit fixed. So fixed percent at 80%. So now what we see is our first group here, this floating header fills the top, floating content fills the middle, and now you see we've got 10% left, right? 10%, 10%, 80%. That equals 100. We can do math. All right. So let's go ahead and finish setting up our last floating group. So this is going to be floating bottom, floating footer. I think footer sounds better. Let's do that. And we're going to make this a column, and we're going to do the exact same thing we've been doing. So 100% of the width, 10% of the height, and now we see it's in the exact same spot as our header, so let's go ahead and float that to the bottom. Again, you see I didn't change anything with left, right, any of that, because we're just going to float it to the left, and then it's extending 100% of the way, so it doesn't really matter, this float here. Now I can't tell what's what, so let's go ahead and change some of the colors here. So let's go back to our floating header. Let's go ahead and let's just remove that style. We don't need it. Let's change the flat color to something here. And let's go ahead and we can leave the middle as it is, and let's pick the footer and change the color there. So let's remove the style on that footer and choose something else. We did something wrong, so let's check out what that is. So we got layout, we got 100% of the width, 10% of the height, and I forgot to make it fixed. So let's go ahead and see what this does. Boom, now we've got that, and we are floating that to the both. What did I do? Let's go ahead and put that on the bottom. Great, and this is why the colors are helpful. So now we've got a top floating header, a floating content, and a floating footer. Now let's go ahead and switch over to responsive, and what we'll see is by using these colors, I can see that this content is expanding all the way across. So it doesn't matter what size my page is, this content is going all the way across, even all the way down to something that's ridiculous like 0. So let's go ahead and switch back over here. Great, so now we've got this page, 3 buckets, doesn't look very exciting, but it's the start. So if you've got this far, give yourself a pat on the back. You've now created 3 groups that are going to define how your app interacts with its, or how a user interacts with the app and how it resizes everywhere. Great, so now we're gonna build out some of the stuff here. So obviously we need to put some kind of text at the top here. This is gonna tell the user probably what page they're on, maybe the name of your app, up to you, but let's go ahead and drop some, before we drop some text, we have to make sure that we resize this correctly. So what I like to do in my apps is, let's go ahead and switch back to our example. I like to have an icon over here on the right. It could be a hamburger icon, a settings icon, anything that's going to get your user to something that they're not always accessing, but has some settings that they might need to use every once in a while. And then I also have this text. Now I want the text to be centered, and I want this to be floating to the right-hand side. So what we're going to do is we're going to wrap that inside of a group. So I'm going to go ahead and go into my containers. I'm going to grab the group container, and I'm going to drop it inside my floating header. You'll see that's group A. And let's go ahead and just rename this. I always have a bad habit of renaming things, and then I get there later and I can't figure out what's what. So we're going to try and do this as we go. Now for this, we're going to use the align to parent layout. And what that's going to do is it's going to open up a few different quadrants. Quadrants might not be the right word. There's 9 sections. So it breaks it up 3 and 3 all the way across. Then you can define where things go in there. So let's go ahead, we add that, we're going to center that here so that now it sits in the middle of this no matter how big or small the page gets. And then I do not like fixed widths with pixels, so let's go ahead and switch this percentage. We don't want to fill up the full row because we want a little bit of buffer on either side, so we're going to do 90. That's going to give us a little bit of margin on either side so that we're not extending out and our icons don't overlap. And then we're going to fill up the entire space here of the container. So now you'll see that line. It's very hard to see, but you can see I've got, a box inside my box. So now, because we used align to parent, when I drop elements inside this group, I can kind of dictate exactly where in the box they go. So let's go ahead and start with a text. So we're going to take a text, we're going to drop that inside the group we just created. You see it kind of falls right over here. And we're going to see, and that's because it's at the bottom right quadrant. I'm going to use quadrant. I don't know if it's the right word, but we're going to use it anyways. So let's go ahead and center that text. So now you see it jumps up here. It fills up the entire space. But right now the box is kind of fixed width, so it doesn't matter how big our text is, it's just going to stay that way. So we're going to uncheck the fixed width. We don't want to have a minimum here, and we don't want to have a maximum here. We want to fit the width and the height to content. So I'm going to select that. And now what you'll see is that box is only wrapping around the text right now, which is edit me, the default text from them. So we're going to add some filler text. We are going to edit this later, make it a little more dynamic, but for now, just so we can kind of see what it is, let's put the word home there. That looks extremely tiny. Don't love that. Let's go ahead and update that with something bigger, maybe heading 1 light. Cool. This gives us a nice little look. Here, so now we've got home directly in the center. We'll go over here. We can see it doesn't matter how big this page gets, it's going to hang out right there in the center. So that's step 1. Great. So now let's add our icon. So I like to use these ionic icons. Bubble has this plugin that you can download and install. So if you haven't installed it, you go over to plugins, install it. These supposedly have a better experience on mobile. I like to give me better options. So we're going to go ahead and drag a ionic icon in there. We did settings for our example. So let's do hamburger. Do they not have hamburger? Let's see, let's use this. I like this little ellipses thing. And then we have white text, so we should probably make this white as well. So there we go, we got that. Now, this is pushing itself to the bottom right quadrant. I want it to be in line with home, but I want it to be on the right side. So no matter what, it's gonna hang out on the right. I don't like fixed pixels, so let's go ahead and update that. So we're going to, set the alignment at the center right. Now let's go ahead and make this a percentage. And 80% is obviously way too big. So let's see what it's gonna look like. Let's try 10. 10 looks good. So 10 fills up about that much space. And then for height, we're gonna do 100%. There, let's give it a little bit of buffer. Let's go 95%. Right. So now we got just a few pixels up at the top and bottom. Don't know if that's gonna make a difference, but it's not gonna hurt us right now. So let's go ahead and do that. Great. So now when I go into my responsive editor, what we're gonna see is that icon's gonna grow. And at right about 992, it's getting a little too big, but that's okay. We're not going to have any devices with that size. And when we shrink down, it gets a little bit smaller. Unfortunately, can't do that kind of adjustment with this text because you can't grow and shrink the font size. So we'll handle that later. Probably not in this video, but you could do, some kind of conditional rule that if a page drags down below a certain number that you can adjust the font size. But for this exercise, we're going to skip that because we got enough to get through. Great. So now you see if you're doing what I'm doing in that responsive editor, you should be able to drag and shrink and see this grow. Now let's add some content to our footer group. So we need some icons down here that later are going to they're going to allow us to be able to switch between different tabs and switch the content that we see inside here. So let's do a similar idea. So we're going to take a group and we're going to drop it down inside of our floating group. And we're going to name this, let's see, what did I name it? Let's go with floating footer. No, that's the name of the major group. Let's go with footer nav group. Doesn't really matter what you name it, but as you get going and you build and you have a fully functioning app, you will thank yourself later for kind of telling yourself what you're working with, so you can find things easily. So we've got that. Let's go ahead and make this a row because what we want to do is we want to see these icons laid out in a row. So logically, we need to pick the row option here. So we're going to create 3 icons inside here. But before we do that, we want to make sure that when we do it, they kind of space correctly. So let's go ahead. You have the option between space around or space between. Really, I like the look of space around. What that's going to do is it's going to push every element as far away from itself as every icon as far away from each other as they can inside the content of your group. So because we've made that group we're going to make this group less than the full size of the floating group, it's going to give us some buffer on the sides, right? So you could use margins for that, but they're not as dynamic. These are more dynamic. Great. So we've got this, so we've got, and then we're going to center this here. So now you see this box centered itself here. Still not filling up as much space as we want, so let's go ahead and change this to %, and let's do 90%. So that'll give us about 5% buffer on either side, and then fixed height, and we're going to make the height. Let's do 95% again, because that worked well for the top. And what you can see here is it is centered here inside this group here. All right, so now we're gonna add our icons here. Oh no, my camera died.